Hi, I'm Mara Webster within Creative Company, and I'm so excited today to be joined by Hannah Khalique-Brown to talk all about her television series, The Undeclared War. And I wanted to start by talking a little bit about the audition process for this, because it was a very long and extensive audition process over the course of about a year. But I love the fact that along the way, it actually sounds like you got a lot more information and a lot more detail on the character than you tend to get, even having details and notes from Peter Kaminsky about the character, and at one point getting the whole first episode. And so interested into the relationship that you developed with the character along the way throughout that process, and a lot of the depth and subtext that you were able to bring into the audition process, which usually isn't always the case when you're just working off of a side or a particular scene.
Yeah, fantastic question. I really enjoyed the audition process for Undeclared War. I think if you're going to do a year-long audition process, you have to enjoy it so that you don't go mad. But it was brilliant. I first sent a self-tape in around February 2020, just before lockdown happened. And that was, I assumed it would just sort of be a normal process, but then of course with lockdown things kept getting pushed, things kept getting moved, so I don't know if it was intended to be a year-long process, but that's what it ended up being. And yeah, I sent my first tape. I did what I do with all my tapes on it. I worked really hard on the material, but no kind of expectation of a result coming from it, just really enjoying it. Obviously seeing what it was quite exciting. I was like, oh, series lead, Peter Kaminsky. But I don't get attached to things early on, or at all really, because it's safer that way. So yeah, I just sent my tape, did hard work on it. But I think quite early on I knew that Saara was special and that the writing was amazing. And even the first character breakdown I got was quite lengthy. I mean, I'm used to getting a few lines, of what the character's like in an original self-tape, but Peter wrote kind of a big chunk, send that off, and then I got a request for another tape for the same scenes but with some notes, which was pretty cool, because getting notes via email, and it was a page of notes with more character information and specific stuff about my performance that he thought maybe I could try differently. That was really cool, because it's basically like a recall tape. So I sent that off. Really enjoyed working on it with his notes. I mean, Peter's really an actor's director. He's very character based, so all of his notes go really deep into backstory and objectives and character, and it was really cool. And he also gave me notes on affectation as well, because I'm quite different from Saara. I'm quite energetic in the way that I move a lot when I talk. Saara's really not like that, and I think Peter knew that quite early on. She's quite still and she doesn't move very much, and she's got a different kind of posture to me. And he gave me notes on those. And then I had a Zoom recall, which was great. That was with Andy Bruley and Victor Jenkins, who cast the show, and they're amazing casting directors. By the time I got to the Zoom recall, I'd been given, I think, maybe 6 or 7 scenes and 1 or 2 episodes. And that was a few months after my first tape. And more notes from Peter, which was amazing. And kind of a like 5-page document about Saara's life and about her childhood, about her school years, about her relationships, about her family, about her character, about why she is who she is, and about who she is. And that was just so cool, because you're lucky if you get that when you get the job. And I got it for the Zoom recall, and that was just like gold dust. And I was just so excited. I was working through it all, and I was doing loads of script work as if I had got the job already, because that was what it felt like. It felt like we were workshopping something, and it really didn't matter what the result was, because it was so fun and so fulfilling. And then I had the recall, and I think on the Zoom recall it was Andy who read in all the other characters, and he was brilliant. He was so good. I think he was an actor before he went into casting, and you can tell because he gave me so much to work with, and it was fantastic. And it went on for quite a while. We kind of overran the audition a little bit, and then it was a long break while they were just being pushed and delayed with COVID. And throughout this whole period, I just couldn't put the damn script down, and I couldn't stop working on it. And I didn't stop thinking about Saara the whole time, which I don't recommend people do, because if it doesn't go your way, that's kind of sucks. But I just couldn't put it down. And then the final audition was about a year after my original tape, and that was in person. And I had already gained so much throughout that year from Peter. I basically had her whole childhood written down, and I'd filled in all the gaps, and I'd created memories of hers, and I'd lived them. And I'd done so much work that I would do to prep a role anyway. So by the time I went to my final audition, I'd already gained so much from the year, and I'd gained so much from Peter's notes, and I was so excited. And I didn't call it an audition. I refused to call it an audition. I said it was a workshop. And I was going, and I kept saying to myself, don't hold on to any result, because you would pay to go to this, to go and spend an hour workshopping a load of scenes with Peter Kosminski and two of the best casting directors in the game. Like, I would pay to do that. I really would. So I just thought, enjoy it, and share your work really hard on them, which I did. Share your work and enjoy the process. And I did. I really, really loved it. And I think I was given about 8 scenes. We only got through 2 or 3 because we ran over again. And it was Victor who read in on the final one, and he was fabulous too. I mean, they're just great, Andy and Victor. And it went really well, and I loved it. And I already felt like I'd formed Saara's character quite a lot, and I changed her as well. Even in the audition, Peter was like, remember not to move too much, because I'm so like in real life, and Saara's very still. And I learned more even in that last audition about how she approaches things and about the way her mind works. It was just so much character work all along the way. But by the time I actually got the job, a lot of the work was already done, which was amazing. And that was the time that I used to do other kinds of prep as well.
And I love what you're saying and you're describing about that stillness in Saara as a character, because it's so evident. And there's a lot of aspects of her which are very internalized. She's, there's so many things, even after the passing of her father, where she's at home with her partner and she's not talking about it. She very much kind of holds everything inside and kind of pushes a lot down. And a lot of that also coming from pressure that she's putting on herself. So there's lots of different elements of that. So what were some of the key kind of components and subtext that you really wanted to bring to her as a character, in terms of the fact that she is very internalized a lot of the time, but for very different reasons at different points?
Yeah, I mean, she's definitely like that. She's not used to experiencing the breadth of emotion that she's forced to experience in the show, because in the show it's like the worst 2 weeks of her life. It's like so much horrible stuff happens. And so she's forced to confront emotion that day to day she just doesn't engage with. She's not an emotional person, and it's too much for her, I think. And she does internalize it. She kind of locks it down and she throws herself into her work. And there's this moment where, she in episode 1, where she's in the family sitting room after the death of her father, and her mother is really having a go at her and being really hard on her, and internally she's being really hard on herself, and she's about to explode. And it cuts to this moment where she's walking through the corridor at GCHQ going back to work at 10 p.m. that same night. And I think it's amazing, because I really felt that kind of avoidance of like reality and trauma, and throwing herself into work at such intensity. And then what I found amazing was when I saw the final cut, the music and the sound and the editing really brought that out. And I was like, wow, she really is just burying herself in something else so that she doesn't have to deal with what's going on. And you're right, when she comes home, it's just something she cannot do. She cannot face that. And she doesn't cook at all as a person. She never does the cooking. And there she is doing the pots and pans at the back of the kitchen, anything to not have to deal with what's happened. So that was definitely one of the things, is that she really buries her emotional vulnerability, and she displaces it as much as she can. And that was a core thing. I think another thing was at the core of Saara that's very different to me is that she's not too concerned about what other people think of her. She's quite, Peter uses the word spiky, which I love, because it's like a almost tactile word, but she is quite spiky, and she's quite blunt, and she's quite she doesn't necessarily think about how other people feel when she says or does things. She kind of just goes with whatever she wants, and damn the consequences sometimes. Whereas I'm not like that. I'm really conscious of what other people think of me a lot of the time, which is probably something I need to work on. But I'm someone who wants to make sure everyone feels good and everyone's happy. Saara's not like that. It doesn't really come into her field of vision. She's very, very much concerned with the puzzle. And that's kind of one of the biggest drives in her, is the puzzle. And that doesn't necessarily mean coding, because people can be puzzles too. But it's always the puzzle that has her brain and her heart. It's all the time what she's thinking about. A lot of the time it's what she's doing at work. It's like, what is the next step in this puzzle, this piece of work, this malware, this absolute riddle of things going on in front of her that she needs to work out, things that people have said to her, bits of information she's got, things she needs to decode. What's the next step? And as soon as she's got the next step, it's always what's the next step after that. And that was kind of almost a mantra that I had for Saara, which is, what's the next step? What's the next step? What's the next step? Because that really does drive her. And that's the same with people. I think she sees people like John as a puzzle. She doesn't understand him. He's like a weird piece of code, and she's like, what's going on? And she gets a bit closer, and she finds a way into him that other people don't, and she finds a little way into his heart and his mind, and she's trying to understand him. The same with Gabriel. She's like, she needs to kind of use Gabriel to get what she needs, and she works out how to get to him. Sometimes it's through making him feel like maybe she thinks he can't do something, and that makes him say, no, I can do it, I will do it. She's quite cunning. and the next step is always a drive for her. The puzzle is at the heart of her. And then the other thing is just, her dad is the only person that's ever understood her, really, and their bond is so profound and intense. And I think one of the wider kind of super objectives that Saara has, that's always underneath everything she's doing, is, I want to make my dad proud. And they all kind of intermingle, but in every scene that's somewhere underneath, I think.
Yeah, no, it really, really is that resonance. And with what you were saying about the puzzle kind of always being at the foreground, I wanted to talk a little bit about your performance when it comes to moments where we do see her kind of trying to decode something and trying to solve those puzzles, because I love the visualization that Peter brought into the show, where we step inside of her mind. But from a performance standpoint, it's so fascinating, because you're trying to bring that sense of what is it she's trying to solve, how is she approaching it, what's the tension or the pressure that's building within her, what's coming in from her home life, as you're just kind of like sitting in front of a computer and trying to create all of that in a visualization, again with that stillness that you were talking about before. And then you're also filming these juxtaposed moments of very different types of settings based on the type of puzzle that she's trying to solve in terms of her reaching the next step. And so how did you approach those two very different sides of your performance, knowing that they were going to be melded together visually on screen?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Peter really hit on something genius when he thought of Code World. That's what we call the landscape, the surreal landscape, is Code World. I don't think anyone's really tried to depict the code sphere in that way, where you can digest it in a kind of storytelling manner that isn't, you don't need to look at ones and zeros on a screen, because I think people have done that before, have code flying up a screen, but it's quite impenetrable for a viewer, and for the average person who doesn't know code, it's just like, what even is that? So I really loved that Peter did something that takes you into the mind of Saara and into the mind of what she's doing. And it was really fun to shoot those, because I mean, so many of the scenes in the real world are so tense and dark, and a lot of them are quite emotionally demanding, and a lot of character trauma. And then we would get days where we were like jumping in the sea and like climbing up walls and standing on top of crazy landscapes and walking through fields, and that was such a nice kind of way to punctuate all the other really intense stuff we were doing. But yeah, it was great. I love how it shows how her mind works and how Saara works differently. because she thinks outside of the box. It's one of the reasons why she's so brilliant and so much better than everyone at what she does, is because she does think differently, and she looks in places other people wouldn't look, and she questions things that other people wouldn't question, and she tries things that other people wouldn't try, which I think is really cool when you see it in this adventure landscape and you see her spot something and question it. And then the tool belt is great because that's like a legit representation of coding, because it's tools, it's a bunch of tools that you call up. Like when you're coding, you think, okay, what do I need to solve this problem? Oh, I know, I have that in my library, I'm going to call it up. And that's what happens when Saara sees something, she kind of locks onto it, and then in her tool belt appears what she needs, like a crowbar or a hammer or a chisel or something to get past the obstacle. So in that way it made sense, and I could kind of link what I was doing, like when Saara's looking at a screen and she's coming up to something that she doesn't understand and it doesn't make sense, like the bunch of garbage in front of her, and then when she's in Code World she's staring at this huge pile of garbage, and Peter works in such a way that he's got this mapped out to a T. Like I don't know how he keeps it all in his head, like everything, every character, their whole life plus the whole story plus every interweaving link is in his head all the time. And I really relied on him when we were on set, and he'd be saying, so this is when she's here in Code World and we've shot that, and that's when you were looking for this, and you know, those kinds of things. And when we were shooting Code World, he'd be saying things like, it doesn't look right, it doesn't seem right, try somewhere else, try this, try that. And so it was Peter who really knitted it all together, and it really made sense. And I prepped for the role by learning to code and really getting to grips with it, and it kind of really made sense. The more I learned about coding, the more Code World seemed like this is perfect, this is a perfect representation of how it works.
And it sounds like in working with Peter as a director as well, that, you know, there was a real opportunity to do really long takes of scenes and to really kind of sit in the moment. And for you getting that opportunity to do multiple takes or to do really long takes of scenes, how did that help you in terms of just immersing in particular moments and finding a lot of the different beats and emotional trajectories for Saara? Yeah,
it's amazing. I mean, Peter is just an astounding director, and he's such a generous director with his actors, because he does give us so much time and he gives us so many notes in such a way that really gets to the core of what's going on. And sometimes he'll give you a note and it will just be like the penny drops, and he's spoken to the heart of the character, he's not even spoken to you, and you've met him in the middle, and he's just amazing. But those really, really long takes were, I mean, I don't know how he found the time. We hardly had any time, and yet we would do takes that we went all the way through pages and pages of dialogue, and it really meant that you could fully sit in the scene, connect with your scene partner, get lost in the under the spell of the scene and under the spell of your character and under the spell of the situation and the given circumstances, and you could really, like you say, immerse yourself in the world. And it was amazing. I mean, there were some scenes that we do, especially some of the more emotionally demanding ones, that I was quite nervous about, because I'd never been asked to cry on camera before. I'd never been asked to kind of have these kind of emotional breakdown scenes before, because I had almost no experience coming into this of actual working on set on something this scale. So I was nervous about them, and I was thinking, I don't know how I'm going to do this, or if I can only do it once and then I'll run out of steam. But the way that Peter works is just so generous, and with so much trust, and with so much, I don't even know, it's a really loving, caring atmosphere to work on Peter's set. And we would do takes and it would just grow and grow and grow and grow, and you'd get to take 10 and you'd be giving more and more. And I think it was like also lucky that all of the other actors were so generous and so giving, that even when it wasn't on them, they were giving everything they had to you. And there becomes this kind of a mutual understanding that it's like, even when I know that it's the back of my head, I'm going to give you 100%, because this is what we're giving to each other to create this reality. And that really happened quite a few times, where I would have somebody and they're not getting covered at all by the camera, but their tears are pouring out their eyes and they're giving me so much because the camera's on me. And then those really long takes, you know, you can do loads of them and they're still being generous enough to give you that even when they're not being seen. And you do the same then for them, because it's an exchange and it's a collaboration. And that was really amazing too. But it was amazing because you'd find more and more every take. I mean, you get to take 7 or 8 of a 5-page dialogue scene where there's crying and there's emotion, and you're getting to the last few takes and you're still finding a word that just clicks, and a word that just changes something, or a moment or a look or something that opens up a whole new world of vulnerability. We had one day in particular that will stay with me forever, where I don't know if you have got to this yet in your watching, but I'm not sure, but it's a scene between Saara and James, and it's one where they're having a really emotional, intense conversation, and that's a long scene, and it's pages of dialogue, and it's difficult emotional work for both actors. And Ed, who plays James, and me, we kind of stayed away from each other that morning because we knew that we had a big emotional scene coming up and we needed to protect our energy. And we got on set, and because it was in the bedroom, there were lots of angles. They had to get wides, they had to get close-ups on both of us, they had to get mid shots on both of us. I knew that I was going to be filming this over 10 takes because of the amount of coverage they were going to have to get. And I was nervous. I was thinking, I'm about to cry now because I'm like, all my prep and everything is quite close to me, but I'm about to do my first take and I'm going to lose it all there. It's all going to be gone, and I'm going to give it all and it will be done. And they won't have it on every take, and it's going to mismatch. But for some reason, sitting in those scenes for those length of time, and like the quietness on set and the atmosphere from everyone, all the ADs, all the crew, was just so calm and so quiet and so trusting, that we got to take 12 and there were more tears and more emotion and more discovery than even on number 1. And I've never felt anything like that. And Ed was the same. And we spoke after that. We hugged after that scene for about 10 minutes. Everyone was crying. Gavin, our DP, was crying behind the camera. Peter was crying. We were all just like, what the hell just happened? That was insane. And I spoke to Ed later that day and I was like, I've never felt anything like that on set before. Like that growth of depth in a scene after so many long takes. And I don't really know why or how it happened, but I think it had something to do with the way Peter works, but also how the whole crew and all the ADs kind of conducted the day. It was such a safe place to let it out, basically.
That's amazing. I also wanted to ask a bit about the notebook that you carry around on all of the projects that you do, because I love the fact that you have this notebook where, following doing scenes or different moments, that you kind of keep a lot of notes in terms of what you've watched other performers doing, what you've kind of picked up, what you've learned from that particular moment along the way on the project. But even with this one, the working, and sharing so many scenes with Mark Rylance, that you even just brought the notebook like into your conversations with him to take notes there. And I was interested in kind of from all of the notes that you were taking and working on a project like this. And because like you said earlier, this is your first time leading a project of this size for a whole series. What are some of the things that you found yourself revisiting that you'd written down as notes in that notebook from working on it?
Oh my gosh, everything. Everything. I mean, I'm still on the same notebook at the moment, so I still write in it all the time, and I go back every day and I just read little snippets. And it's amazing actually how you can, especially in acting, I think you can learn something and think you get it and go about your day or your life knowing that you know it, and then 6 months down the line you relearn it and you realize you didn't know the half of it and you learn a whole new dimension to it. And it's amazing. I think I would recommend anyone who does this kind of work to write everything down that they learn, everything, because you really process it when you write down, but you also when you go back to it, you have to relearn stuff all the time. Sometimes I'll be in like an acting class or like working on a scene, and I'll kind of remember a lesson that I've learned before, and I think I haven't thought about that for 6 months, and yet it's like at the core of what I need to be doing. And I think acting is like spinning plates a lot of the time. You got to spin your plate of like knowing your objective and your scene. You've got to spin your plate of knowing your obstacle, and you've got to spin the plate of your given circumstances, and then spin the plate of what the hell's going on with your scene partner and like what they're giving you, and reading them constantly and taking the temperature of them constantly. And then spinning plates of your childhood characters' childhood memories and core beliefs, and their character dynamic and their character problem and their current problem. And you're always spinning these plates, and you're always going to drop one of them or two of them or three of them. And you may drop one of them for weeks and completely forget that that is something that you really need to have with you. And when you write stuff down, and when you write all these notes and lessons down in a book and carry it with you everywhere you go, you're constantly reminding yourself to pick up those plates and think, no, but what's their secret? And but what's their given circumstances? And And I honestly think that we'll be dropping plates until we, as actors, until we die. Like, I don't think you'll ever get to a point where you can fully carry all of the plates. That's the goal. But until then, I'm going to keep going back. But yeah, loads of stuff. I mean, stuff about presence I really gained from Mark, because Mark Rylance is just an absolute master of presence and being present. And that is something that you can work on your whole life and never really understand. And he's just got it. And I actually asked him quite a few questions about it. And shamelessly just wrote down what he said in front of him. And I learned lots from Peter. I also learned a lot from Simon Pegg. And I learned a lot from Gavi, who plays Saj, Saara's brother. Gavi Singh Chera, who's just an astonishing actor, who I think really has a similar quality to Mark, actually, and he's just amazing. And I asked him a lot of questions and wrote down a lot, and we discussed a lot of stuff. And German, who plays Vadim, we talk about craft quite a lot, and we're always talking about concentration and focus, and being open, and being really open to letting things like transcend through you, and big ideas to pass through you. And actually, me and German, since doing the show, do this kind of weekly Zoom call where we do our own actors on actors, like the actors on actors videos. We do our own one, and we just talk about acting. It's so embarrassingly nerdy, but we love it. So all of this stuff is written down, and I constantly go back to it. Stuff about presence, stuff about prep, and in the morning about having conversation with your character. That's one thing I developed when I was shooting that I always go back to, which was every morning speaking to Saara and almost like a prayer, saying, I love you, I trust you. And she would say, I love you, I trust you, and having a moment with her to thank her for telling her story through us. And because I built her as a very separate person to me. And that was something I talked to Mark about, and he has his own way of starting the day, and all of this stuff I'm constantly going back to every day.
I love all of these details of everything that this experience of working on the series was for you. It's such a great character and such a great performance. And thank you so much, Hannah. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.